And then I think the third thing is that we have to understand that if we really want to be successful, we've got to find a way to make healthy behaviors in our players intrinsically satisfying and unhealthy behavior inherently undesirable. And once we do that, our job's done. That's what self-discipline is. It's understanding healthy behavior is intrinsically satisfying. And that's difficult to do because healthy behavior usually means hard work. And the problem with hard work is it pays off in the future. But laziness pays off now. And that's a hard sell in today's society where the credit card society says, give it to me now and I'll pay you later. I think many times when the freshmen come in to me, they don't understand what I'm trying to do, and maybe they even resent what I'm asking them to do. They feel like I'm demanding too much from them. But by the time a player gets to be a sophomore or a junior, they understand it's not what I want from them, it's what I want for them. And when they figure that out, they'll play for you. They'll do basically anything you ask them to do. You know, I think our players, as would be true of any of the players in some of these programs that are just so amazing, is they will do just about anything you ask them to do. And I think that's the difference between sacrifice and punishment. It's not the amount of pain you endure, it's the amount of choice you have. And if you give them the choice and make them make the correct choice, you'll probably be pretty successful as a coach. I've occasionally heard a coach now and again say that, well, I just can't wait till this senior graduates, or I can't wait till this class of senior graduates. I hope none of you have been guilty of saying that. But when a player comes into you as a freshman, that is not your fault. However they are, that's how they are. But when they leave your program as a senior, it is your fault. We've got to step to the plate and make the changes that we need to make in that player. That's what influence is. I think if I had to state my coaching philosophy, it would be don't go where the path leads. Go instead where there is no path and leave a trail. I want to share just one quick story with you as I finish up, and as I thought about kind of what I felt like represented who I am as a coach. I always like to search for role models, and sometimes it's hard for me to find one that satisfies me, but this particular role model, I've never actually met in person. I met her great-grandson, but if you know me very well, you know I spend a lot of time in the summers traveling to different places and different countries doing different things just to maybe improve myself a little bit or get a different taste of life. And one summer I went to Alaska to live with a tribe of Indians to kind of learn more about the Indian ways. And a man named Huey Byfeld was my guide during that time. And we spent a couple of weeks camped on the banks of the Yukon in the interior of Alaska. And we were sitting around a campfire one night, and Huey said, "Let me tell you the story of my great-grandmother." And ever since that time, I've kind of held her as my role model. And when I fall short, I think of his grandmother, Anna Byfeld. Anna Byfeld and Victor Byfeld were his great-grandmother and grandfather. And they lived in the early 1900s, way back in the interior of Alaska in a single-room log cabin. He took me while I was there to show me that log cabin. And there was a neighbor that lived about 10 miles away from that cabin. His name was Ned Reagan, and he was from the lower 48. He was a white man. And they didn't have any fences, they didn't have any boundaries, they just had a common understanding of this is my area where I trap and hunt and fish, and this is your area. And occasionally Ned Reagan would cross over into Victor Byfeld's boundary, and they would have some words about it. And so one day the argument got fairly heated, and that night Anna Byfeld heard a knock on their log cabin door, which was very unusual in the middle of winter when you had no neighbors closer than 10 miles, but she answered her door. And there stood Ned Reagan in a fur coat, a parka, and snowshoes, and he said, "Is Victor home?" And she said, "Yes." And Victor walked to the door, and he took a shotgun out from underneath his parka and blew Victor's head off. As Anna stood there and watched with her two young babies inside the cabin. And then he turned around and walked away. And as upset as she was, she didn't know what else to do, so she covered her husband's body up with furs. And she was afraid that Ned Reagan would come back to the cabin and murder her as well, because she had just seen him commit a murder and thought that she might witness against him. So she loaded her two children in a dog sled. And keep in mind that Anna Reagan was a very tiny woman. She was only about 90 pounds. loaded them in a dog sled and mushed those dogs 20 miles up the frozen Yukon to her brother's house. She had 2 brothers who lived about 20 miles upriver, and she took them up there on the river ice to the house of Hog River Johnny and Weasel Heart, her 2 brothers. And she said, "You've got to go hunt down Ned Reagan. He just murdered Victor." And they said, "We can't do that. You need to find a marshal and do it by the white man's laws, because we can't take it in our own hands anymore." So they convinced her to try to take it to court. So she got a marshal who hunted down and arrested Ned Reagan. She traveled to Nome, Alaska, which was about 1,000 miles by river, about 350 miles as the crow flies. And she went in late summer and went by river. By the time she got there, it was late fall. She testified in Nome against Ned Reagan, but nobody in Nome knew how to speak Koyukon, which was her tribe, so no one could interpret what she was saying. And Ned Reagan got off scot-free. And when she finished that trial, she said, "I can't stay here among you kind of people any longer. I've got to get back to my 2 children." So she was determined to set off on foot back to her village of Huslia. And not only was the winter coming, but she had to cross Eskimo territory, which at that time Eskimos and Indians were very bitter enemies. But she set across, a 90-pound woman, set across the interior of Alaska, went through Eskimos, fought off all kinds of things. There's a whole book on it called Shadows of the Kayakuk, if you ever want to read it. It's an amazing story. But anyway, she eventually got home, and she could see the light of her log cabin, and she could see the silhouettes of her 2 children through that cabin as she got back home. And before she would go into the cabin, she decided to snare a rabbit and cook it and eat a rabbit before she walked in the door, because she said, when I deal with my children, I want to be the proper example. I want to be able to stand straight and tall and proud. So she killed that rabbit and walked in the door, as Huey told me, 1 year and 2 moons later. Took her 1 year and 2 months to get back home. And she walked in straight and tall and proud. My wish for all of us as coaches is we continue to do that. And at the time we can, it's time to get out. But I am so pleased to have had this opportunity tonight. I thank the committee. I thank all of you. Wish all of you the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Great job. Great job.